Okay, so Brother Harnath, we are live and recording, so I'll make you then host and you can start the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I'll leave then.
Yeah. Pradeep, and
you don't have to make me co-host, Harnath, because every time I get the notification while speaking, like someone is trying to enter the room. So you can remove from the co-host.
Let me do that first, then
yeah.
Remove co-host. Okay. Now I am the only host.
Yeah.
Shall we start? Yeah.
You can make Taralji as co-host.
Taralji, is it okay for you?
Bolo?
I made you co-host.
Acha. Okay.
Yeah.
So
good morning, one and all. A very warm welcome to all the participants. So today we all gathered here for a talk on the subject Law of Sacrifice, a book by Dr. Besant. So today our speaker is well known for every young theosophist because he actively participates in every Sunday sessions, and we know his record. But let me go through his records. So his name is Mr. Pradeep, MS, but he has done masters in biotechnology, and now he is working as a business manager for an organic products company, and also he is a professional consultant for hydroponics. He is a third generation theosophist and an active member of the Bangalore City Theosophical Lodge, Karnataka Theosophical Federation. So he was born in a family of theosophical members, hence naturally raised in a theosophical environment. As an active member of TS, he was invited by many lodges in Karnataka state to give lectures to their members on various theosophical topics. He is also an active member of Young Indian Theosophist group. We all know that. They meet every Sunday online with various activities. So he has given many lectures and conducted study classes to this group. All the videos have been uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you have time, please go to the YouTube channel, YIT channel. So he has been invited to the panelists in youth form of the first day of 146th Convention, International Convention of Theosophical Society, held online. And he delivered a short talk on the subject, what are our challenges? And now, today, he is going to talk on the subject, Law of Sacrifice, a book by Dr. Besant. So, Brother Pradeep, you can go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Harnath, for your warm introduction. Very good morning to everyone, and welcome again for today's session. We have been studying this book, The Laws of Higher Life by Dr. Besant. This is the third chapter that we're going to study today, that is the law of sacrifice. We already studied the laws of higher consciousness, the law of duty, and now we will see the law of sacrifice. In our previous chapters, we came to know that there is a higher consciousness that is working, and how to awaken the higher consciousness within us while we still live in this physical world, while we still experience this lower consciousness, we deal with this lower consciousness, but we can try our best to awaken the higher consciousness, and then we can allow that higher consciousness to function through these lower bodies and make our life better. And in a similar way, we found there are ways of awakening that higher consciousness, and that is through law of duty, We have learned in the second chapter, Law of Duty, that at any given point of time, how aware we should be of to do the right thing, how brave should be we to do anything that we feel it's correct, and how should we correct ourselves when we go wrong, when we make wrong decisions, and how to take something which is against our own will, but which is supposed to be done. With various examples of Mahabharata, we learnt how the duty of any work or job that we are going to perform, how we need to be bound to it, and how to take a stand, how to be brave enough to stand by our ideas, and at the same time, how to be humble and subtle and not to be attached to those functions that we perform. So that is one step of how we can awaken our higher consciousness while we work, while we deal with these lower world. And the next step is the law of sacrifice. So law of sacrifice is the second step through which we can reach that spiritual life. We can reach to that stage where we start living a spiritual life, where the higher consciousness is completely awakened, and which helps us to transfer or to take a leap from this lower world to the higher world. That is the second step that we call the law of sacrifice. So the law of sacrifice lifts us upwards and enables us to reach union with the divine. So this chapter that we are going to deal today, the law of sacrifice, teaches us how this quality of sacrifice within us can help us to reach the divine. Since the universe in which we live itself originates in an act of sacrifice, in the limitations of the logos, in order that the world may come forth, all the religions have on this point but a single teaching, that manifestation began by an act of divine sacrifice. So every religion teaches this common point. There are no contradictions. Every religion accepts this point, that the logos has sacrificed its life, its freedom, which was one with the divine or one with the universal consciousness, and it has sacrificed its universality, it has sacrificed its freedom and became an individual. So the sacrifice started at the beginning itself, when universal consciousness or the universal soul, or whatever you may call it, when it gave rise to various tiny parts of its own, which we call as logos, or the universal or the individual self, that itself is an act of sacrifice. So the beginning of this cycle of life, the beginning of this cycle of evolution itself has started with sacrifice. The individual self, which became separate from the universal self, it has sacrificed its universal being. It has sacrificed its universal nature and became an individual self, individual Atma, which we call as logos. So Madam Besant is saying that the very beginning of this life, of this evolution itself, there is sacrifice. The first thought that we have as we watch the evolving of a universe is that this manifestation of life is only possible by its limitations. So by the breaking of form after form and the assuming of new ones, does life continually evolve. So when this individual self has sacrificed its life, its universality, and became an individual self, it acquires forms. Now, once it acquires forms, if the cycle of evolution has to take place, then it has to sacrifice one form and then move on to the other form. So there is sacrifice in the beginning, and then there is sacrifice at every step of evolution, where the individual self sacrifices everything that it has acquired at one stage and then moves on to the next stage, acquiring new things, learning new things, taking new forms. So therefore, without sacrifice, the self, the individual self, cannot move to the next level, and hence without sacrifice there is no evolution. Thus, there comes to be implanted in the very nature of the growing being the idea that by taking, by grasping, by holding, the life is preserved, the life is increased. So therefore, in this cycle of evolution, it is not only the sacrifice, but there is also an involvement of acquiring, by taking, absorbing, learning, taking new forms, getting used to new things. So this process of sacrificing something that is old and accepting something that is new, this leads to evolution of life, evolution of nature, and evolution of consciousness also. So this kind of cycle in our Hindu philosophy is called Pravritti Marga. So Pravritti Marga means this cycle of evolution where one form is sacrificed, one stage is sacrificed, one kind of matter is sacrificed, and a new form, new stage, and new things are acquired for higher learning, for more activities, for increased manifestation of the consciousness. So this cycle of leaving something old and acquiring something new and bigger responsibility and bigger forms is called Pravritti Marga in our Hindu scriptures. Everywhere is he learning that on the path of Pravritti, the path of forthgoing, he must grasp, take hold, and appropriate. Everywhere he is learning to try to absorb into himself other forms, and by union of other forms with his own, to preserve the continuity of this existence in form. So therefore, in this Pravritti Marga, the logos or the individual self is trying to appropriate, trying to take, trying to adjust to the new forms, and at the same time trying to learn and trying to increase its area of manifestation. And that's how it preserves this continuity of life. When the great teacher began to give lessons to the evolving Jivatma, the teacher began to say to him, life is preserved not simply by taking, but also by sacrificing that which you had already appropriated. It is a mistake to think that you can live and grow simply by the appropriation of other forms into your own. All living things exist by virtue of mutual exchange, by the recognition of the fact of mutual interdependence. So, when the individual form is in this line of Pravritti Marga, is trying to acquire new things, the great teacher who came to give lessons again and again to these evolving humans or the evolving Jivatmas, he said, you just cannot hold on to what you have and keep on acquiring new things, new forms, because this entire universe is interdependent. Where one life form gives away something which is useful to the other and acquires something which was given away by someone else. So there is nothing that is being created fresh and given to you. And there is nothing that you give up goes waste. All that you have now, you give up, you sacrifice, but that goes as a useful thing to the next level. All that you acquire at this stage is something which was given up by your predecessors or by your previous forms. So that's what the teacher, the great teacher taught to the Jivatma in this path of Pravritti Marga. You cannot preserve your own form by the appropriation of others without contracting a debt which must be paid by the sacrifice of some of the appropriated object for the maintenance of other lives. All lives are bound together by a golden chain, and that golden chain is the law of sacrifice and not the law of grasping. So therefore, every life is bound by this chain where one life form gives away something and acquires something which was given away by the predecessor or the previous forms. Here what Sri Krishna taught. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna said, this world is not for the non-sacrificer, much less the other, O best of the Kurus. So this world is not for the non-sacrificer. If someone decides not to sacrifice, he cannot acquire something new. So once he fails to acquire something new, he will be eliminated from this evolution. So this world is not for those who are not ready to sacrifice. That's what Krishna said in Bhagavad Gita. The revolving wheel of life cannot go on unless each member, unless each living creature helps to turn it by the performance of acts of sacrifice. Life is preserved by sacrifice, and in sacrifice, all evolution is rooted. So therefore, as we discussed previously, that this life can go on only by this act of sacrifice, and the evolution is rooted in this act of sacrifice. Thus, we see established in the Hindu ritual the well-known 5 sacrifices, which include in their wide circle the sacrifices which are necessary for the due maintenance of the lives of all the creatures in the world. So therefore, having known that sacrifice is the root of evolution, sacrifice is the main ideal that keeps this evolution going, that keeps this life as a continuous event, and that keeps every individual to acquire, to rise above its present state and reach higher stages. The Hindu rituals or the Hindu scriptures have taught us 5 sacrifices. So what are these 5 sacrifices? Let us see. We are taught that our relations with the world invisible, with the Deva world, can only be preserved by the sacrifices to the Devas, in which we recognize this interdependence. We give to them, they give to us, and thus nourishing one another, we reap the highest good. So in Bhagavad Gita, it has been said that the first sacrifice is for Devas. What do we sacrifice for the Devas? Anything that you feel that in the name of Deva, in the name of God, you sacrifice. You either stay hunger, you sacrifice your food for a day, you sacrifice your clothes for a day, you sacrifice something else that you like, anything. So any sacrifice that you do in the name of God is the sacrifice that you do for Deva. Or you have a holy fire and you sacrifice the food that you eat, the materials that you use, so that the energy that is generated from such sacrifice, from such acts of sacrifice, is useful for the entire world. So that is the first sacrifice that you do, because you give to them and then you take from them. The second sacrifice is, then we learn the sacrifice which is called the sacrifice to the rishis, to the wise, to the teachers. And what do you sacrifice for the rishis or the wise or the teachers? The sacrifice of study, by the performance of which is paid one of our debts, by the performance of which an obligation is discharged. For by study we learn in order to teach. So how do we give a sacrifice to our teachers and our rishis? Whatever we learned from them, when we teach to someone else, all that we have learned, when we teach, when we make others to learn that, that is the best sacrifice that we give to our teachers. That is the second sacrifice. For by study we learn in order to teach, and thus we keep up the succession of knowledge, handing it down from generations to generations. So the second sacrifice to teachers and rishis and the wise can be done by by teaching whatever we studied from them and passing the knowledge from generation to generation. That's how we can perform the second act of sacrifice. The third act of sacrifice, we learn that we must also pay the debt to the elders, the sacrifice to the past, the sacrifice to the ancestors, to the Pitras. Recognizing in that, as we received from the past, we must pay our debt by giving it to the future. So the third sacrifice is to our parents, to our elders, to our Pitras, to all our ancestors. And how can we perform the sacrifice? In the same way as we received from them, whether it's a life, a fortune, or anything, or a beautiful nature, or a beautiful house, or anything that we received from them, by passing on to the next generation without harming, without disturbing, without causing any damage to that. If we pass on to our future generation, that is the best way of giving sacrifice to our ancestors. Our ancestors has given this beautiful world, these beautiful lakes, rivers, streams, forests, everything. And without causing much harm to these valuable things, if we can pass on to our next generation, that is the best thing, best gift that we can give to our ancestors. Next comes the fourth sacrifice. Next, we learn to pay our debt to humanity. So the next sacrifice is to the humanity in general. We are taught that we must feed at least one man every day. We should try to feed at least one man every day. In that man who is fed, the Lord of sacrifice is also fed. And when he is fed, all humanity is fed in him. So therefore, when you feed at least one man per day, the Lord of sacrifice is fed through him, and hence it is equal to feeding the entire humanity. And then lastly, the fifth sacrifice is we learn to sacrifice to animals. In the sacrifice to animals, in the 2 or 3 animals that daily we are bound to feed, we are feeding the Lord of animals in his animal creation. And by this sacrifice, the animal world is maintained. The fifth sacrifice is to feed the animals, or 2 or 3 animals that you have with you, or that live with you in your house. And then through feeding them, by taking proper care of them, you do your sacrifice to the animal world for the maintenance of that animal world, because from that animal world is what we get all the forms for the logos to start its evolution. When the law of sacrifice is thus interwoven with and united with the law of obligation, then the next step is placed before evolving jiva. So once the jivatma, which is in the pravritti marga, which is in this continuous process of evolution of leaving one form and acquiring the other form, once it learns these 5 sacrifices that we have to perform in our daily life, and the next step is we need to learn that this law of sacrifice should also be bound with law of obligation. So what is this law of obligation? You have learned to do some acts as acts of obligation. So you need to do the sacrifices or any act just as an act of obligation, because you have to perform it. You are here to perform it. You now have to learn that the world is bound by action. You must learn that looking for the fruit of action binds us to the world of action, and that if we would be free from such binding, we must learn to sacrifice everywhere the fruit of action. And in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has said, with such object, free from attachment, O son of Kunti, perform thou action. So in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna has said, it's not only that you learn these 5 sacrifices, but you should also learn the law of obligation, where you will detach yourself from the fruits of those actions. And only when you detach yourself from the fruits of those actions, then only then that the sacrifice is complete. But that all actions are to be seen in the light of sacrifice by the renunciation of fruit of action. When we sacrifice the fruit of action, we are beginning then to loosen the bonds of action, which bind us to the world. For have we not read? Of one with attachment dead, harmonious, his thoughts established in wisdom, his work sacrifices all actions melts away. Bhagavad Gita. So in Bhagavad Gita, again, it is said that of one with attachment dead. So in those where the attachment is completely dead and who is harmonious with every being, his thoughts established in wisdom. And where his thoughts are established in wisdom, his works, sacrifices, all actions melts away. So he completely detaches from the action and the action itself melts away. The world is bound by karma, by action, save that action which is sacrifice. So the act, the performance itself is nothing but it should be a sacrifice, because the entire world is bound by this karma, where one action leads to another reaction. For every action, there will be an equal and opposite reaction, and that action should be a selfless, a completely detached, and you need to detach yourself from the fruits of those actions. Only then you will go further in this cycle of karma. So this is about the pravritti marga, what the teachers have taught of what are the laws of sacrifice in the pravritti marga. So once that is the lesson which begins to be breathed into our ears as we approach the end of pravritti marga, as the time comes for turning homeward, for entering the path of return, the nivritti marga. So as we discussed, the pravritti marga is where the life leaves one kind of form and acquires the other and starts living in the new forms. But then there comes a point of life where it starts going back to its original place, where the soul has to travel back to its original place, to its real place, to the place where the soul resides, so that to complete one cycle and then take the all that it has learned in one cycle of life and then move ahead into the other life. So the return journey, where the soul starts going back towards its original place, original dwelling place, is called nivritti marga. So in this nivritti marga, there sounds out to him a still higher note, a still higher lesson, which is to lead him over into the nivritti marga, the path of return. So in Bhagavad Gita, it has said, with regard to this nivritti marga, better than the sacrifice of wealth is the sacrifice of wisdom. O Parantapa, says Sri Krishna, all actions in their entirety, O Partha, are contained in wisdom. Learn thou this by discipleship, by questionings, and by worship. The wise, the seers of the essence of things, will instruct thee in wisdom. And having known this, thou shalt not again fall into this confusion, O Pandava, for by this thou wilt see all beings without exception in the self and all in me. So uh, in this path of nivritti marga, the first thing that to be learned is to see one with everyone. So to see that there is no difference between oneself and with any other form that is existing outside. So that is the first thing that to be learned. So the sacrifice of wisdom, again, whatever wisdom that one has gained, oneself has gained, the sacrifice of that wisdom itself is the first step for starting this nivritti marga, where the soul tries to reach its higher level of consciousness. By the sacrifice of wisdom, we shall learn to see all beings in the self and thus in God. So once you sacrifice that wisdom that you have gained, if after once you gain the wisdom, if you hold on to it, it leads to ego. It leads to yourself, your obsession to yourself. So you need to learn to sacrifice that wisdom also. So once you sacrifice that wisdom, then you will see all beings in the self and thus in God. So you'll see that all beings are in yourself and you are in every other self, in every other being, and hence in all together in the God. That is the note of the path of return of the nivritti marga. So the basic note of this path of nivritti marga, where the soul starts its return journey towards the higher life, is that to sacrifice the wisdom and to see one in every other form. That is the lesson which has now to be learned by the evolving man. So this is the lesson that a man has to learn while traveling his nivritti marga. The critical point comes now in the history of evolving Jiva. Now there is something, another thing that Madam Besant is saying, which is very important, that a critical point, a critical stage comes in every evolving soul. He is trying to sacrifice the fruit of action, trying to be dead to attachments. And what is the inevitable result? The attachment to the fruit falls away. Vairagya seizes him. Dispassion overcomes him. He finds himself hanging, as it were, in the void. All motive of action has disappeared. He has lost the stimulus of pravritti marga. He has not yet found the stimulus of nivritti marga. Disgust of all objects is upon him. He seems to have wearied of the law of duty. He has not yet seen the heart of the law of sacrifice. At this moment of pause, at this moment of suspension in the void, he seems to have lost touch with the world of forms and objects. But he has not yet found touch with the world of life, with the other side. So there is something very interesting that Madam Besant is analyzing, that it is not that as soon as the pravritti marga stops, the immediate right at that moment the nivritti marga starts. It's not like you go in a bus or a car and then you take a U-turn and start coming back. It's not like that. It's the junction between where you reach the end of pravritti marga and you start the nivritti marga. The junction is very critical. At that junction, every human or every evolving soul reaches that junction, and it's not so automatic that something stops and the other journey starts. It's not like that. But that critical point at which evolving soul has learned the action of has learned the law of duty, has learned the law of sacrifice, has lost all detachments to its actions, has started vairagya, has developed vairagya, where there are no more attachments, but it has not yet entered into the path of nivritti. It has not yet started the journey of nivritti marga, where the complete heart of sacrifice is not yet reached. So that critical junction is what Madam Besant is saying. At that time, every evolving soul feels void, feels like hanging somewhere where you can't even see the rope, and you can't even see if you fall, where are you going to reach? You can't even see the end of the well, and you can't even see the rope that you are holding. You feel like you are hung in void. You feel like you are totally lost. So that stage every evolving life reaches. That's what Madam Besant is saying. It is as though a man crossing from a precipice to precipice by a narrow bridge suddenly found the bridge yield beneath his steps. He cannot return. He cannot reach out to the brink beyond. He seems to be hanging in the void, in mid-air, over the chasm. He has lost touch with all. So every soul, every jivatma will reach the stage where he has given up this pravritti marga. He has lost attachments to everything. He doesn't find any passion for any materialistic thing, but still he has not found the way to nivritti marga. So he's hanging somewhere in between. Fear not, O trembling soul, when that moment of utmost isolation cometh. Fear not to lose touch with the transitory, ere thou findest touch with the eternal. Listen to those who have felt the same isolation, but have passed beyond, who have found the seeming void to be a veritable fullness. Hear them proclaiming the law of life, upon which thou hast now to enter. He that loveth his life shall lose it, but he that loseth his life shall find it unto life eternal. So here, Madam Besant is quoting that you should not fear at that junction. What you can best do is to listen to those, try to listen to those who have already crossed that stage and are in the path of spiritual life, are in the path of nivritti marga. So here she's mentioning about the teachers, the great teachers who guide, the invisible teachers who will guide you. So try to listen to those invisible teachers. Try to listen to those who have already crossed that junction where you feel in the void, being hanged in the void, where you feel you are nowhere to go. And that time, the only thing that you can do is listen to those teachings who have already crossed. You cannot touch the higher until you have lost the grasp of the lower. So until you totally lose the grasp of the lower self, lower world, or the lower life, you cannot try to reach the higher life. Such is the law of higher life. In giving up the lower, the higher is secured. And by throwing up the life, we know the life eternal gains us as its own. So to completely believe that there is a higher life, there is a higher journey, and to completely believe in that, and then throwing away all that we are still holding on to, uh, at that junction is the best way to transfer from pravritti marga to the nivritti marga. None but those who have felt it may know the horror of the great emptiness, where the world of form has vanished, but where the life of the spirit is not yet felt. There is no other way between the life in the form and the life in spirit. There between them stretches the gulf which must be crossed, and strange as it may seem, it is the moment of uttermost isolation. So that junction where the life of form is already lost, but the life of spirit or the spiritual life, the higher life is not attained, is not being experienced. And at that gulf, at that junction, you feel a complete isolation, and it is very fearful. We read in Shastras, in those outer actions, that they are full of deepest meaning. That when the disciple approaches his teacher, he must ever come with sacrificial fuel in his hand. What is the sacrificial fuel? It represents everything that belongs to the life of form, everything that belongs to the personal lower self. All must be thrown into the fire of sacrifice. Not must be kept back. He must burn his lower nature, and his own hands must light the fire. He must sacrifice himself. So we have learned this in the Shastras, that when he comes to the teacher to attain the higher life, to attain the spiritual life, he has to burn himself. He has to burn all that he's holding on that belongs to the lower world. Just in proportion as we empty ourselves all that we have, is there room for the divine fullness to flow in and fill us more than we were ever filled before. Therefore, the note of Nivritti Marga is renunciation. Renunciation is the secret of life, as appropriation is the secret of form. So therefore, here Madam Besant is speaking about renunciation. So we have heard about this renunciation. We have studied about this renunciation in various religious scriptures, in Jainism, in Buddhism, and even in Hinduism. We learn this renunciation, where it's complete giving away of all the worldly pleasures, of all the worldly forms, of all the worldly things that we have. And then complete detachment to this worldly life is renunciation. So that is the basic note of Nivritti Marga, which helps for the soul to travel back to its higher life. On first entering the Nivritti Marga, where renunciation offers herself as her guide, her voice may seem cold and stern. Her aspect may seem almost menacing. Trust her, nonetheless, whatever the outer appearance, and try to understand why sacrifice at first stage gives us the idea of pain. So the renunciation is not very easy. In the beginning, the act of renunciation, the act of sacrifice of the lower, of all that is that we have attached in this lower world or the lower life, is very painful. So try to understand why it is giving pain. Try to understand at first stage why the first sight gives us the idea of pain. But when we begin to live the life of spirit, the life which recognizes the one in the manifold forms, then there begins to dawn upon us the supreme spiritual truth that sacrifice is not pain but joy, is not sorrow but delight. That which to the flesh is painful is bliss to the spirit, which is our true life. So once we try to understand why it is painful, then we know that we are still bound to it, where we are still holding to it. But this supreme truth will dawn upon us when we think that the sacrifice is actually not painful, it is joy. Here is the joy of the saviors of mankind, of those who have risen to the knowledge of unity, have become the guides, helpers, redeemers of the race. So if we see those who have already done these things, if we see those great teachers who have reached this stage, we know that they have sacrificed their world, they have sacrificed their worldly things with very happiness, with complete happiness, and it's not really painful to sacrifice. That is why the saviors of the world can help the race and strengthen his weaker brethren. So because they enjoy that sacrifice, that's the reason why they can help their other brethren. Thus, the law of sacrifice, which is the law of life, is also the law of joy. And we know that nothing has a keener pleasure than the pleasure of pouring out and not taking in, and that no limited joy can be equal to the joy of self-surrender. So therefore, the law of sacrifice, which is the law of life, is nothing but the law of joy. So there is more joy, more happiness in pouring out than acquiring in. And now for a moment, let us bring this lofty idea down to the level of our daily lives. So in the end, let us see how these, I think I still have time. So for about another 5 minutes, I will deal with this part, which is very important, where Madam Besant is saying how we deal with this law of sacrifice, whatever we learned in this Pravritti Marga and the law of sacrifice of the Nivritti Marga, how can we apply to our daily life? How then shall we behave ourselves to our brothermen? We see a man low, degraded, ignorant, and foul. No special tie of kindred nor past karma binds us to him, nor does anything. Hence, compassion takes the place of what in the man of the world is repulsion. Love takes the place of hatred, and tenderness replaces indifference. And the sacrificer is marked in his attitude to those around him by his touch of divine compassion, which cannot see the repulsiveness of the outer form, but can only realize the beauty of self-enstrained. So, how can we apply this to our daily life? Once you learn this, the act of sacrifice, the act of detachment to your action itself, and then you see that you see one with every other. You see one with the painful, you see one with the person who is ignorant, and then this great compassion, great love that is developed in you, and that is what which helps others also to overcome this this selfishness. The sacrificer comes across a man who is ignorant, while he himself is wise. Does he feel the contempt of the man of knowledge for the man of ignorance, and hold himself above him as his superior and a separate? No, he does not feel his wisdom as his own, but as common property belonging to all alike. So in your daily life, when you come across a person who is ignorant, who is not having much knowledge as you, once you are completely aware of this law of sacrifice, you feel that the knowledge or the wisdom that you have gained is not your own. It's not your property. It belongs to everyone. And therefore, you don't feel any difference from the person who has gained the knowledge, the wisdom, and compared to the person who has no knowledge or wisdom. So, but as common property belonging to all alike, and he shares his wisdom in the separate form with the ignorance in the other separate form. And that leads for sharing of wisdom and knowledge. The man who lives by the law of sacrifice realizes the unity of self and recognizes only a difference in the containing vessel and not in the dwelling life. So once you learn this law of sacrifice, you feel that you are only a vessel which is contained, which is a part of this entire universal life, and it's not something that you are separate from others. Only in this way we live in the eternal. Those who see difference pass from death to death. Thus speak the Shruti. The man who sees difference is really continually dying, for he is living in the form, which is decaying every moment, and is therefore dead, and not in the spirit, which is life. So the man who sees the difference is still living in this, in this continuous cycle of life, and one who sees the unity is one who can travel further. So brothers, it is not so. The life of the disciple is one long series of petty renunciation, one long series of daily sacrifices, one continual dying in time in order that the higher may eternally live. So therefore, Madam Besant says, dear brothers, this life of disciple is not just one sacrifice or one complete renunciation at one stage. In fact, it is a long series of petty renunciation. So it has to start step by step. So there is a long series of renunciation, long series of sacrifice that you do. And that is what that leads you to the higher eternal life. The life of the disciple is lived in the home, is lived in the town, is lived in the office, is lived in the marketplace. So it's not that you practice this law of renunciation, the law of sacrifice, and then you go away from everything. You can still do those act of sacrifice, act of renunciation while you still live in your house, while you still live in your office, and while you still live in the marketplace. So even by living in this world, still you can practice this act of renunciation amid the common lives of man, amid the common lives of every man who is surrounding you. The true life of sacrifice is that which utterly forgets itself, in which renunciation becomes so common that there is no effort, that it becomes a thing of course. So once you practice and it becomes a daily thing, then you see that the act of renunciation or sacrifice, it comes without any effort. If we lead that life of sacrifice, if we lead that life of renunciation, if daily, perseveringly, we pour out ourselves for others, we shall find ourselves one day on the summit of the mountain and shall discover that we have made the great renunciation without ever dreaming that any other act was possible. So I leave you with these words of Madam Besant. Thank you so much.
So thank you, Pradeep ji. You had done great job, I can say. It was really a, a mind-blowing session, I can say. Like, see, uh, you had a great start and you had a great ending for the class. If you see the uh, thing, let me summarize what he had said into small thing. Okay, so the starting will be like the beginning of evolution started with sacrifice, which is very great. Power lies in that line. You know, soul gave rise to individual souls or logos. So that he is calling as sacrifice, which is very reasonable, and it is very clearly explained the Pravurti Marga as well as Nivurti Marga and the junction point between the two Vairagya. You had delivered a great talk, I can say, and also you had given the 5 sacrifices, like the sacrifice for Devas and the sacrifice for the teachers. What is nothing but by sharing knowledge only, by sacrificing the knowledge you acquire, then only you will help others. And the sacrifice for the ancestors, we have to save the nature. And the sacrifice for humanity, we have to feed the poor. Sacrifice to animals, we have to feed the animals. So all these involves, in these actions involves a superficial sacrifice, So that superficial sacrifice is running the entire universe and the entire nature, I can say. For suppose if you see, sacrifice should not be out of the self-intention, If at all, if you are sacrificing out of a self-intention, that is not at all a sacrifice. And if you are sacrificing without a self-intention, that is real sacrifice. There are 2 kinds of sacrifices. One is eternal sacrifice, which doesn't have any self. For example, if you see the great personalities like Gautama Buddha or Jiddu Krishnamurti, these people had done a lot of sacrifice. Even I can say they sacrificed their life itself for knowing the eternal truth or knowing the self. So that's the thing we should have to habituate, or we should have to know how to sacrifice. So thank you, Pradeep ji, for giving such a wonderful talk. So I would like to open the discussion forum. So if at all, if anybody have any kind of questions, you can start the video and you can ask Pradeep ji, and you can start the discussion. Or if at all, if you don't have, if you have any other questions, please type it in the chat box.
Sir, can I ask a question?
Yeah, please.
This is a sacrifice has been so far from the side of man is has start so far. The same act by the God has given rise the creation. This creation of the world is also by the act of sacrifice, if I am correct.
So, Pradeep, could you please have you got the question?
I think what he's trying to say is maybe he's trying to confirm what we discussed in our lecture, that the creation of this universe, the creation of this life itself has started with the act of sacrifice. Maybe he wants us to elaborate that, maybe to better understand. I think if you have studied the textbook of theosophy or the basic principles of theosophy, in the first chapter itself, you will see how the life was created, how the universe was created, and in that you will see that in theosophical terms what we believe, or what our elders or elder brother has said, that the universal self has given rise to various forms of individual self. So every individual self was part of the universal self in the beginning, which we call as universal spirit. And then all these tiny parts of the universal spirit, they arise and they take their individual form and become the individual self. So that individual self, which was part of that universal self, has attained the individuality, has given up its universality. So that itself is an act of sacrifice. It's very difficult for being in a wonderful, joyous place to come out of that and then to lead this life of misery and struggle, right? So if you're, for example, you're already in a wonderful place, you are enjoying it, you don't have to take the cycle of life and death, then what makes you to come out of it and then take this form of misery, take this life of misery, to select this path? So that itself is a sacrifice. That's what it means, that the very beginning of the very beginning of the life, where the individual self, which was very much part of the universal self, has taken its individuality and started this cycle of life, itself is a sacrifice. Now people ask us, people ask this question very often, that okay, when it was very much one with the universal self, then what made it to take the individuality and start this life, right? What was the reason, what instigated these individual selves to come out of the universal self and then start this life? Well, for that, the answer is that the universal self is nothing but complete love. So love cannot be stagnant. Love can only be functioning when it is given and received. So therefore, that act of giving and receiving, which is the very much basic nature of love, that has led to the individualization of various parts, where they give and take, where they start this process of give and take, where the love can sustain its nature. The very much nature of love is to give and take. So that nature of love, giving and taking, has led to this individualization, and then which goes through these forms of life and then finally attains its universals. So I hope I gave a very brief introduction to that huge chapter, but it's a big subject.
Yeah, my point is only, as we go, as we ascend above, we have to sacrifice and renounce. The same procedure has been followed while descending from top to bottom. The same method has been used in the process of creation. And the man is also taking help of that renunciation and sacrifice. He has to reach his original place. That is my point of this one, telling the.
Yes, correct. Very much accepted, and that's what we also discussed. Thank you, Basuraj sir.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So I think anybody wants to ask some more questions? So both the Pravrutti Marga and the Nivrutti Marga involves sacrifice, isn't it? Because if you see the Pravrutti Marga is taking one form and leaving one form by taking a new form. So we have to sacrifice the old form. That's what I understood, what sacrifice lies in Pravrutti Marga. And also if you take the Nivrutti Marga, we have to sacrifice the acquired form one by one. So if you take the example of a cocoon, which is turning itself into a butterfly, it is sacrificing it is the previous form to become a butterfly. But in some sense, it seems to me like it is a natural instinct, instead of calling it as a sacrifice, I just call it as a natural process or a natural instinct or a responsibility, or I can call it as a duty, So maybe that's the reason Dr. Besant has said it is a duty of sacrifice. So
I
anybody
think someone raised their hand. B.S. Babu. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Please.
Good morning, sir. Talk.
Yeah, sir, you can.
Yeah. Sir, I have a doubt that when some teacher is suggesting you that you should adopt the law of sacrifice, does it actually mean that you have a choice of to adopt or not to adopt?
See, can I answer? That's all is the question, right? Very short question.
Yes. That's all.
Well, it's nobody can force you to learn something, and nobody can force you to to become a spiritual person, right? Once you knock the doors of the spiritual life, it is you in the beginning who has already opted to travel this path, right? So now once you have opted to travel this path, this is a teaching how to better live in this life of spiritual path. So if someone has opted, has knocked the doors of the spiritual life and want to travel the spiritual life, but still want some option, that's impossible. See, if you take an admission to a course, it means you want to pass the exam. You take the admission, but if you want to be given an option to pass or fail, that it's up to you, right? So it's something like that. This is to those who have already taken this option or have selected this path of life, and this is to teach them the law of sacrifice, the law of duty, the law of higher consciousness, how it makes you more clear and how it makes you less confusing to travel in the spiritual life. So it's you who have already opted it. So now there is no option. It's just giving a teaching, helping you, helping all of us, in fact. You means everyone, you and me, everyone.
Okay. Can I just talk, sir?
Yeah, please go ahead. Please go ahead, Mr. Babu.
No. My actual, I think I am not understood properly. What I'm trying to ask you is the law of karma, law of sacrifice, law of obligation, law of duty, all these revolve around the obsession that we have choices or we have free will. So is that right? So if somebody is instructing us, they also assuming that we have a choice either do it or not to do it. It is why they are instructing us, or there would be no instruction at all.
I think
Yeah, I think the question
I
was,
think I'm not. Yeah, Harnath, can you repeat the question, or if you have understood it?
I think he's asking like, if at all, if you have choice, so whether to do sacrifice or not to sacrifice, what the mind says is like whether to sacrifice or not to sacrifice. When there is a choice, it undergoes some kind of confusion.
No,
We
this is
sir,
not.
Make it very clear and make it very short, the question, because we are not able to understand what actually you are questioning. Are you there, sir?
Yes, I am here.
Yeah. Could you please make it some more detailed and short?
Yeah, I see. I was told that I should obey the law of sacrifice. Did I understand it rightly?
Your voice is breaking, so maybe we are not able to catch.
There is signal problem.
No, sir.
Sir, your voice is not clear. We are not able to hear you.
I'm sorry, sir. Is it now? Am I audible?
Okay. Let me try to answer whatever I have understood by that question that he's trying to ask. When we say we need to obey this law of duty and law of sacrifice, we need to understand this in this path of spiritual life. He's saying, is it an option whether to accept it or not to accept it?
Correct.
Maybe he's trying to say, if you don't accept it, but you can still live in this spiritual life, you can still, things go automatically. Maybe that is what he's trying to say. Well, see, life takes its course. Life does its work. Nature does its work. Everything happens automatically, whether you put an effort or not. Of course, everything is automatic and it takes its form. But what is our aim? Our aim is to live this life in automatic way and give it to the life to take its own time to learn things and gain wisdom, or are we trying to put some effort to learn something, to know about higher life, and then to mold our lives so that we be useful to our brethren while we still live in this world? So it's left to us. If you think, well, I live a normal life and let the thing takes its own course, let the life takes its own time, it's up to you. But if you learn things, if you learn this law of duty, law of sacrifice, law of karma, everything, your life is bettered, your progress is faster, but at the same time you become some useful to others. Someone learns from you, you become useful to your own family, you become useful to your friends, and they see you and they also feel there is something change in this person. So it's up to you. Of course, there is no compulsion, but all our effort is to lead this spiritual life and to gain wisdom and to be a better person. So if you tell me, is there a choice to become a better person or to just be an ordinary person? Well, of course, there is always a choice. So the choice is to become a better person. Yes, you need to learn this. If you don't want to be a better person and be the person who you are, same now, it's again, you're free to do that. Yes.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
One
So-
Ganesh Kumar raised hand, Harnath. Just find out.
Yeah.
Yes,
So,
Ganesh Kumar.
we have a question in the chat box also. I think Miss Vidita has.
No, I think that was a very good answer. And we have to remember, we human beings are the only species who have been given this special privilege of selecting and directing our lives. That's all I want to say.
Vinita has asked
Yeah.
has a question. Should we give unsolicited advice to the persons around for the sake of sharing wisdom? Generally, it is not well taken. Kindly suggest. I think this is a very good question. That should we give advice to everyone and all the people that we come across just because we have knowledge and just because we know things? No, because knowledge or wisdom is shared only when someone is seeking for it. It can only be shared, you are allowed to share anything only when you are sought for it, when you are asked for it. So when you are not being sought, when you are not being asked, of course, as a human responsibility, you can only give a suggestion. But again, you need to have this sense of detachment from your suggestion again. Just because you advise someone, just because you suggested someone something, they are not bound to listen to you. They are not bound to do how you said. And then you should not feel bad for it. As a responsible human, you have suggested, you have brought to the notice of the other person whatever you know, but you should do that action by detaching yourself from the fruits of that action. So the fruits of that action is that person should listen to you and do that action, right? Do that work. So if you learn this detachment of fruits of action, then you won't find any difference. As a responsible person, you have done your job and that's it. Whether the other person listens or not, that's fine. But if the person is seeking more wisdom, then you are always welcome to give more wisdom and more knowledge or in detailed suggestion. That I think that's what I feel the answer for that.
Yeah. So Mr. Ganesh Kumar has said like, and this choice is the special privilege bestowed upon the human species or not to any kingdom, any other kingdom. True. Yeah. So as we are running out of time, could you please make it fast? Like anybody have any important questions to ask? If at all, if you don't have any questions, we can close the session by a closing prayer. Seems like no one is having any doubt. Okay. So, brother Pradeep ji, could you please help me in the closing prayer? So we will close the session by prayer.
So no comments from Taral ji, or should I close?
Please close. Everything has been answered. Time is done. And today I am co-host. Thank you.
Okay.
Doing my duty.
Let us all close our eyes and meditate for a minute. And after that, we will close the session with a prayer. Om Sarve Vai Sukhinah Santu Sarve Santu Niramaya Sarve Bhadrani Paschantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Thank you. The session is closed.
Thank you, Pradeep ji. Thank you, all the participants. Thank you, Taral ji.
Thank you, Pradeep.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you, Harnath. It was really a